And I'm coming to you today from the traditional territory of the Stanawis people in my little home office. So welcome to all of you. And I'm also the executive director of the Kw'umut Lelum Foundation and the facilitator of the panel conversations today. As you will see in the first point of housekeeping, we had a little flash up for, we are recording this first part of the session. Our hope is to have the Q&A part of the panel where I'm asking the questions on our website after the third session. So as you know, this is a three-part series. The third one will be in the first week of November, and then we will have them up on the website. So yeah, so thank you for that. And again, just housekeeping, after these 30-minute conversations, we will open it up to those of you on the call. So, and we might have a small group, so hopefully a great opportunity to ask some questions. What else for housekeeping? At the end of today's session, we will be emailing the participants if you could support responding to a quick little evaluation. Our hope is that I think we might have even advertised that this would be the first an annual event, and we would hope to kind of continue these kinds of education and awareness opportunities with all of you, our supporters, as we move through and develop and learn. So we appreciate your feedback along the way. Yeah, so I think just again a few more pieces around the foundation. For those of you who may not be familiar, we are a very new foundation. We came incorporated last spring of 2021. We are an Indigenous-led community foundation, and what makes us unique is that we are the first in Western Canada and one of three in Canada. And our mandate is generally health and wellness and education. And, you know, we support 9 member nations on Vancouver Island, from Malahat to Qualicum, if you know that area of the world. And, you know, what's again unique is that it's an opportunity for, as an Indigenous-led community foundation, to ensure First Nations control over how we invest in our young people. And that's, you know, what we're here to talk about today, and that self-determining path that we are taking in this work. So again, thanks to each of you for joining us. And I'm going to introduce our lovely panelists. First of all, we have Louise Mandell. So Louise is one of the founding partners of Mandell Pinder law firm, which specialized in Aboriginal rights. And I know one of those cases that she was on was the Kw'umut case, very famous case set up in my territory. And Louise and I know Louise knew my great-great-grandfather, and that's always a very special connection that we have, Louise, that you knew him, and I know you supported him, and when he gave evidence at that time, and so as well as many other people in that area of the world. So we're very fortunate to have Louise on our board of directors, not only for her knowledge and the long-held relationship she has with Indigenous people and with Indigenous communities and their lands. And you know, you're fortunate on the panel to hear from Louise, not only for her expertise, but also well, we've talked about this as the board, and Ralph, certainly you and I, that Louise, you just have this wonderful lyrical way that you express yourself that is really heartfelt, and I think that's what's so important in all aspects of the work that needs to happen in this country. And so thank you for all that you do and for being here today. Next, we have Ralph. And so Ralph Nilson, President Emeritus at Vancouver Island University, and an appointee to the Order of Canada in 2021, well-deserved appointee. I've known Ralph for a very long time, and known Ralph as a wonderful advocate for Indigenous people's rights, but all disenfranchised groups. And I think, Ralph, what you exemplify for me is that balance of taking truth and reconciliation work, incorporating the being and doing of that. So, you know, really, I had the privilege of watching you learn through your relationships with Indigenous people, and then making a commitment to act. And so, again, I think we're so fortunate to have you as a board member, and certainly I'm very fortunate that you've been a a mentor in my life for many years. So thank you for being here and all that you do. So great. So with that, let's get to the questions for your board of directors here, the panel, my board of directors, your panel. So we'll start with you, Louise, and if you could just share what brought you to the foundation, kind of what values and aspirations you hold for doing this work, and particularly around Indigenous-led philanthropy.
Thank you very much. I wanted to first just pause and give thanks for the privilege of participating in this one perfect and precious moment. It's a very happy occasion and deeply meaningful to me because I take immense pride in being on the board of this foundation. Supporting the KL Foundation is supporting the self-determination of 9 remarkable First Nations, transforming their communities through their youth by providing opportunities, including through education, but most importantly, wrapping their culture around them. And this is just a community of meaning to me. And I just would like to share a few minutes of my journey. I was the first post-Holocaust generation, grew up with the question, how is it possible that 6 million people could be murdered under cover of law? I went to law school and I was a law student with a finely tuned mistrust of the law. And then just through a wave of synchronicities, I found myself working for the late and great Grand Chief George Manuel at the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. And I found myself walking on a path that had paved by the ancestors seeking justice to the land question. And I was given this torch to carry along with others, this powerful and brilliant light that just refused to surrender, because embedded in the culture of our province was this arrogant dismissal of Aboriginal people being without land or laws. And one question dominated, which is, how is it that the government got the land Indigenous people occupied without paying for it or without any treaty or conquering them? And it was this question that I took to court for almost 40 years. Sharon spoke about the important case Delgamuukw, which we litigated. I'm just going to summarize 40 years of litigation in 1 minute, because basically the Crown governments raised the argument of extinguishment, and they said that Aboriginal title had been extinguished. And it all boiled down to 2 doctrines, which they argued in all their declining alternatives. The doctrine of discovery, which was based on the false supremacy of Crown governments, and the doctrine of terra nullius, which is based on the false inferiority of Indigenous governments. And all of these doctrines and all of these arguments were rejected by the Supreme Court of Canada. And there was actually a legal revolution that happened where the court really declared Aboriginal title and Crown title coexist. We have legal pluralism here, different titles, different jurisdictions, different cultural narratives. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People herald in the doctrine of self-determination. And so it's wonderful to be part of an organization where self-determination is part of the path forward. And I should say that 1% of philanthropy in this province is Indigenous driven. And so to actually be a part of having the right of self-determination being implemented, having opened up that legal landscape through the court, is one of the most beautiful pieces of my retirement work. But I wanted to add to it as well that I had the privilege of being the second chancellor of Vancouver Island University. And this is a university which is a leader in reconciliation, and with a deep commitment to ethics and stewardship. I have 2 takeaways which show up again in the work of the foundation. One is that if systemic barriers for Indigenous people are to be eliminated, it requires guidance and mentoring and support and partnerships. And the second is that it's just beautiful to watch when somebody breaks the glass ceiling and opens up the door for post-secondary education for other members of their family and their communities to follow. And that is what the work of KL is doing. So I just wanted to, just in answer to Sharon, what are the values? It's the fact that it's the nations who understand family and place and our connection to Mother Earth and the power of transformation and wrapping their culture around the kids. This is the power and the force which is actually taking the next step along the path that I started with Grand Chief George Manuel. And I do want to see Indigenous laws on the ground, and I do want to see reconciliation being creating a collective relationship based on mutuality, where all of the goodness that we each know from each of our cultures challenges each culture and each one of us to grow. So I just wanted to thank you for the question.
Thank you, Louise. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, for providing all of that context. And again, just, demonstrating your wealth of relationships that you hold so dearly. Ralph, I'm going to turn to you for this similar question. What brought you to the foundation, and what values and aspirations do you hold for Indigenous-led philanthropic work?
Thank you very much, Sharon. And like Louise, it's a real honor to participate. I'm currently in the East, and so I'm in Algonquin territory, and but of course live in Nanaimo and have been had the great pleasure of learning from the communities on Vancouver Island and in British Columbia, and in previous years in Saskatchewan and on the East Coast. And always I've found this incredible welcome, just wide open arms, welcoming me to participate, welcoming me to learn, and welcoming me to understand. And consistently, what I found that it's much, much better to listen than to talk, because usually when I'm talking, I don't listen very well because I've got so much to say, or I think I've got a lot to say, but I always did much, much better when I listened. And so to your point a little bit earlier, I've learned a lot. I've learned an awful lot from the communities in which I've been able to live, the communities that have welcomed me in, and the communities that have taken the time to help me understand. And that helping me understand was absolutely essential. The listening and listening again was essential to me in terms of my responsibility as a person who had a role in community. What was my responsibility in terms of reconciliation? What was my responsibility in terms of a population of people, the first peoples in the land, who had incredible inequity in terms of opportunity, incredible inequity and exclusion from opportunity that just was not justified in any way, shape, or form. And then how do we articulate that in the context? One of my very good teachers, an elder in Sinimuk, reminded me that once you stand up, you can't sit down. And so my path over the many years, I've stood up many, many times. And now that I'm no longer in position, there's no way I can sit back and say, I don't have anything to participate with. I don't have anything that I can contribute. So I looked and saw and learned from my experience at Vancouver Island University. And I realized while we were bringing all kinds of resources from a variety of different sources to play as it related to supporting First Nations communities, and all on a whole effort to look at the reconciliation road and do everything that we could, it was still the university that was a responsibility for the funding that we brought together. It was still the university that had to make the decisions at the end of the day, that had to do the audit reports and all of that. And so while as much as possible we supported the communities and gave the communities the lead and the responsibility, we couldn't give that accountability from many of those foundations that we were bringing dollars to the table with. And so I recognized very, very clearly, and as I did more and more research on this, that there was a real shortfall in terms of the opportunity for communities to own and control their own philanthropy, own and control, and look forward, going forward, and having this toolbox in the chief's box, in the community's box, and really taking responsibility. And it really hit hard when COVID came, and we saw all these communities cut off. And we raised a bunch of money to give to the communities, but the communities couldn't accept it from these foundations because there was no mechanism through CRA for them to allow them to receive that funding. And so there was a definite deficit in terms of the public policy that needed to be addressed. And one of the best ways we could do that was by having the nations in the Kw'umut Lelum group, who'd working together for 25 years on child and family services, pull together and see whether they would think about this as an opportunity. And the values of looking at and supporting children, the values that have driven Kw'umut Lelum for 25 years was a real strength and the rock on which this could be built. And the communities were very appreciative, very excited. And especially when we got into some of the conversations and realized that, at times Kw'umut Lelum received some money, or somebody offered some money to them, they couldn't accept it. They ended up going through another foundation and paying a percentage of that money to that foundation. Didn't seem right. Other monies that we received, we had to partner with another foundation to get it distributed. And this was for kids that were being cut off, and we were giving them all a laptop and connection so that they could stay connected for school. And so that was another example. And so the learning that's gone on, the understanding, and then the incredible strength of the communities and standing on their principles, on their values, and their teachings have allowed me to learn and allowed me to understand and really motivate me to continue in that role of responsibility in using any of the resources of connections that I have to contribute to the work of Sharon, to contribute to the work of the chiefs, to contribute to the work of the communities, and ensure that they have every opportunity that every other community foundation does. And it isn't a community foundation making decisions for the nations, but the nations making the decisions for themselves. Just that fundamental piece, which is the self-determination that Louise was talking about, that has to happen in philanthropy too. And so here's an opportunity that has been developed, and it's an opportunity to learn and go through all of the processes and then share these processes with all other communities across the province, across the country, and change that number. It's not just in BC, it's 1%. I believe it's nationally. 1% of philanthropy goes into First Nations communities. 1%. And that's just unacceptable in this country, especially when we look at the money that's being flowed and the way private and public foundations are delivering money. Fabulous things are going on, but it's not being done, decisions being made by the communities. And so this is a very, very exciting project. I feel very, very privileged to be invited to participate. And I learn every day in our conversations. And while Sharon says that she has received some mentoring from me, I think I'm on the receiving end of most of that mentoring, because she's very good at guiding me quietly and making me think that I'm doing something because I thought about it, but actually she's way ahead of me on most cases. So Sharon, thank you for that.
You're very welcome. Yeah, and I think it is, what everything that you both shared. It really is that reciprocity that that we have to foster in these relationships of giving and receiving, and again, that lines up so well for this sector and what we can do in terms of inviting donors in, inviting partners in to really again, as both of you have shared, to learn, because I think that's what what I'm finding is, like, how do we enter in, how do we come into the conversation, and how do we move beyond again, acquaintances and to the doing. And so thank you both for sharing what you did, and I might come back to that question or that topic, but right now I'm going to jump ahead to you, Louise, around this word philanthropy, which again, philanthropy. You try saying that 3 times, right? It's a mouth twister, but so in the Greek tradition, it translates to the love of humanity. And again, Louise is someone who's spent a lifetime working with Indigenous people. And I know you have in-depth knowledge of Indigenous laws across many different communities. So can you describe how you've witnessed this love of humanity? How does that translate to an Indigenous philosophy?
That's a big question. Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on what Ralph said about listening and saying that really what I've learned most has been from listening and listening and acting. And I wanted to start with that because like when I listened with the ear of my heart, what I heard was a whole landscape of spirit that I knew nothing about, where principles and laws transmit across the generations, creating principles to live by, like respect and humility and reciprocity. And also this incredibly important ability to embrace vulnerability with compassion. I attended a meeting not so long ago. A Haida elder began it. This is a population whose smallpox took that nation from over 13,000 people to 580, and the population has grown since. But she began the meeting with, "Thank you, Creator, for making hardship our strength." And it's that beautiful way in which the moment is unfolding. We're here on purpose. There's an honor to accepting things the way they are, not wishing they were some other way, and pivoting gracefully. This is where your ball has landed. And so this like brings forward what I was privileged to do and which philanthropy offers others to do, which is the honor of acting once you hear something which has touched your heart. We're called upon to act. It's a very powerful event giving, which can change the focus of your heart and mind, not doing something out of guilt, but out of just inspiration. Like this is a cultural change we all want to do together to push the boundary of possibilities. So it's such a deep generosity in terms of learning and also in terms of relationships. And that's where I want to come back to when Sharon asked me, like, what have I, learned in terms of, the way that the word translates to a love of humanity. And I just wanted to land on this, that for most Indigenous cultures, all that I've participated in, there's a word in all their languages which roughly translates to all is one, we're all connected, we're all interrelated. And at the heart of that teaching is such a gift about reciprocity. And it's something I'm going to call love, but I don't think love is big enough for it, because I think the term also embraces a compassion, like for all living things, which enlarges the human spirit. And it draws us together with the holy and the sacred and the many kinds of spirits that exist in this world and sky. And this reciprocity translates into laws, like we take care of the land and the land takes care of us, like we share responsibility for each other. And the sheer generosity, it teaches us about being loved through loving, of receiving through giving. The chain of good that comes from reciprocity is just this amazing way in which we learn how we can flow love from ourselves through listening, through doing, through receiving. It's a very personal thing, the power of relationships that we're taught through this whole lesson about reciprocity. And I wanted to just say that it's been such a privilege working with Indigenous people all my life. And although I began in a sense, hammering on a different aspect of the word civilization, which is predicated on concepts of justice and democracy and addressing colonization, what I came out of it with is just an incredible enlargement of my own spirit and my own capacity to love. And I learned that that is what I received. To give is to receive. And that's what I've learned in the course of the work that I've done and the privilege of being here. Thank you.
Wow, beautifully said, as always, Louise. And I think, yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, and was part of my intent for the question, because I knew that you would come at it from that place. And I think that you know, that vulnerability and that everything that you expressed, I think when we can get there, just like as you're explaining, then you can really start to feel like all those barriers come down if we operate from that real premise of love. But yet, you know, again, it's hard, right? We're taught to put up walls and not show emotion. And so, yeah, so thank you for sharing that, and just the impact that's had on you and your practice. We're getting close to but I'm going to ask Ralph another question. So for those of you who have questions, please, I forgot to, you can put your hand up or put them in the chat. But Ralph, I'm going to go to you again, and please feel to share anything that Louise shared. But my specific question again, I wanted to come back to this 1%. And actually, I was at a conference last week, the Philanthropic Foundations of Canada conference, and it was actually said that it's the most recent report is it's like 0.055%. So, and a big portion of that money that is given comes from the National Brotherhood, the Indian Brotherhood. So it's Indigenous people giving to Indigenous people. So a lot more we can do to unpack that less than 1%. But again, from your perspective, I'd like to hear how you think that we can challenge this inequity, and addressing, first of all, this persistent need that we have as Indigenous people, but also like long-term solutions, so that, again, that with that self-determining voice that we want to assert. Oh, you're on mute, Ralph.
Thank you. And thank you for the question. I believe there's an awful lot of work we can do here. All of the attention and understanding that the country has been developing about reconciliation and the responsibility that everybody has, and the fact that all of us live in treaty land, and we've got to respect that, we've got to understand that, and the only way we're going to continue to grow as a country is if we address this and pay attention to it. Well, that also includes a lot of the conversations we've been having about the multi-dimensions of poverty. And by the multi-dimensions of poverty, we know that poverty isn't just money. Poverty has many, many other aspects to it, whether it be isolation, whether it be social context, etc. And we also know as a country that as public policy has evolved over time, it has not evolved in a fashion that has paid attention to the responsibility that the country has. And so the shortfalls in many jurisdictions are taken up by changes in public policy, or getting things addressed in a way that suits a particular population in a particular place. Sometimes that involves philanthropy. Many times it does involve philanthropy. Many times it doesn't. But we also know that more and more people are recognizing the responsibility. And so as communities, I think it's important to be developing mechanisms like the Community Foundation, the KL Community Foundation, to give people an opportunity to participate and engage, because those opportunities haven't necessarily been there, where it's been a controlled philanthropic organization that's controlled by First Nations communities, that's established on First Nations values, that's established solely on First Nations purpose. And we know, again, my role as an educator, I've come at most things from the focus of an educator. But education is a key determinant. We know the social determinants of health have been talked a lot about the last 30, 40 years in this country. The two key determinants of health are education and income. And you don't get one without the other. Education's the top one. Education is the top one. Yet when you look at the education statistics in every province and across this country, while we're seeing growth in First Nations communities and individuals from First Nations communities participating, we know it still lags behind in the manner that is unacceptable. And many, many times it is the lack of supports and the lack of attention to the needs of individuals who are going through the transitions from high school to college, and then from college to work. And so there's a lot of opportunity to invest in those various places. And it's a lot of the work that I've done over my years has been looking at what are the needs, how do we invest? It's not just about a university scholarship that pays tuition. It's about all the other costs that go on. It's about all the other supports that go on. It's about being seen as valued in the context of the community, but it's also about recognizing the knowledge that exists in the Indigenous communities. I was very, very privileged to be part of a community at Vancouver Island University. Sharon, you know this was took a lot of dialogue and a lot of a push and people standing up and taking some risks. But we recognized our elders as faculty members. And we didn't just recognize them as faculty member by saying they're faculty members. We paid them on the same scale as we paid faculty members. How else do you get recognized as a faculty member except you get paid on scale? So we pay them on scale. Their knowledge is as valuable as any PhD. My PhD come out of Oregon. Did I learn from those elders? Absolutely. Did they learn some things from me? Maybe not quite so much, but they learned some things. And the point being, when you're working in this place where you're working as equals and you're seeing each other, how can you possibly work in an environment where you don't see each other? By being equal, by being not only being equal, but taking the steps to change the policy so that you ensure that you're taking every opportunity that you are equal in every way possible. Those are big changes. And, I know they're big changes, but unless we take the action on all these steps in all these places, we're not going to get where we need to be. And so my excitement about the opportunities that we've got now within the philanthropic organizations within philanthropy in Canada is that this is completely new territory. And the work that is being done here, as I mentioned before, and I'm repeating myself, it can pave the way for others to learn from the challenges and mistakes, the good things that are going to be happening, and take and apply it in all these other places across the country. And instead of the local community local community foundations many times draw on their communities and get great representation across the communities, and that's good. But I think it's also very, very good that the nations have their own foundations and that they're are able to develop and show the opportunities that exist. And when we get to the education, a lot of what we're talking about is how do we invest in youth? How do we invest in youth equitably? And as Louise helped me learn, how do we address the hereditary nature of poverty this country has imposed on most First Nations communities? And that hereditary nature of poverty is really a devastating piece of what the fundamental underbody of this country is about, where we've got that inequity that just perpetuates itself time over time over time. And we can address that by taking steps, small as they may seem. They're going to take steps, and they're going to give control, and they're going to be opportunities for growth and continued evolution in the communities. And there's going to be some real interesting conversations on reciprocity that evolve and develop as a result of this. Thanks, Sharon. I can go on. I like to talk, so thanks for not cutting me off.
No, of course not. Again, fabulous response, and again, I think learning from you and what you've learned from your elder mentor is, that once you learn this stuff, we can't sit down, we have to keep pushing. And and I think that's what's exciting for me entering this sector, is that people are talking about this inequity. And again, I think, the action part is where we're all trying to figure out to get to, but there's progress in this conversation that's currently happening. So I appreciate your responses. So now I will see if the participants have any questions. And again, if you just want to put your hand up in that little reaction box, and you can say your question out loud or put it in the chat. Now's your chance. You guys need a little more time to get some questions going? Okay, no worries. I have another question for you, for our panelists. And so, so this is a bit of a two-parter. So again, we just recently celebrated the second annual National Truth and Reconciliation Day in Canada on September 30th. And so for both of you, again, a two-parter, but what progress do you see we're making in this country around, particularly around truth and reconciliation, more that needs to be done? And Ralph, you started to get at this around, again, what can the philanthropic sector do to support the TRC's calls to action? And Louise, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure, thank you. Ralph, I just wanted to thank you so much. I loved listening to you and just your leadership and making the world over through education and innovation and partnerships, and the wonderful way that you've been unraveling colonization and disrupting bias. And I just wanted to thank you and Sharon for the work you're doing too. And to answer that question, you know, like reconciliation is transformation, and transformation is just like the turn of a kaleidoscope where you shift one part and the whole thing changes. And what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission did is give all of us the power of the kaleidoscope. They put something in the hands of each one of us to do. And, you know, I hear a lot of people thinking, oh, well, I'll put it all off and leave it in my will. It'll be kind of transformation, or reconciliation will be a bit of a legacy project. But I just wanted to encourage everybody to connect with the present moment. I think of my mother-in-law, who used to say, I'd rather give with my hands warm than my hands cold. Talking about is that it's so gratifying to be the one who is giving. This makes our identities real. And when we can, you know, give with the right kind of generosity, connecting with the experience of the present moment, we are helping ourselves too. Like this is drawing us into the delicate work of rising to our own human potential to be better versions of who we are. And in that, we develop relationships. Like, to give, it asks questions of ourselves and others in time. Like, to give generosity, we then move into the surprise of things, like the surprise of receiving, the surprise of understanding, the surprise that those who we are giving to understands that we understand them. And we're really meaning makers. And I think the highest form of generosity is connecting to the cause of doing something good. And in this context, the Truth and Reconciliation gave us the power, each of us, to dream about how we can do something good. It's really an explicit acknowledgement of our shared future. That's what we're giving into, and that's what we're receiving for our kids, is a better future. So I just wanted to just finish maybe at this point in answer to that question about you know, the incremental gains we get in wisdom and in helping and enjoying our lives, and to have our lives permeated by the recognition that we're giving and what we give and how we receive. And to say this, that we can't change the past, but we can change the future by the stories we tell. And this is a time, stories are at the crux of healing. And this is a time where we can give, in this case, to the foundation and change the stories of a lot of people who will be receiving the opportunities that the nations dream for them. And what comes out of this struggle? Well, love and change comes out of this struggle. And just the good we can do with each other just can be breathtaking. Thank you.
Lovely. Yes, so true. And it's interesting. I was hearing from Chris Gugu he works with the Olneweg, Indigenous-led community foundation on the East Coast, and he said something similar in terms of legacy giving. He said that from his perspective is to kind of let that legacy giving, we have to disrupt that, as you're saying, because again, we need to invest and stay with the communities. Mm-hmm. And so, like you're talking about, is the richness is in the relationship, right? That can come out of the learning and being together in this. So thank you, yes, for sharing that. And Ralph, we'll go to you. Would you like to share your thoughts on the question? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. I tend to do that, as you know. Yeah, I've got a number of thoughts, and again, thank you for Louise for your gracious comments, but also for the emphasis on stories. It's so true that stories are so important to all that we do, and we have a great dean at the Vancouver Island University who is arts humanities dean, and she's in faculty member in the English department, and she'd share books with me that she thought might be helpful to me as I was in the role of president at the university. And one of those she shared with me was a book called, I believe it was called Story Wars. And it was just a great book about how important stories are in sharing and helping people understand, and really helping individuals to understand. And where that really came into play was when I started doing a lot of the work and Louise was very helpful in this, Sharon extremely helpful in this, but the whole university, when all the people on campus moved together to provide support for young people who had grown up in foster care and many times did not have opportunity after they were aged out of care and had no supports to get them through university. And so we managed to simply provide them tuition. And then as we learned, because we learned a lot from these young people, we had to do an awful lot more than that. There was a lot of wraparound supports we needed and everything. But my point about the stories in this piece is that these young people's voices, many of them when they came, they were very much in a place where the institutional environments they'd been a part of and where they'd grown up, their voice was very difficult for them to share. And what I really appreciated was the kind of supports that were provided by the faculty and staff on our campus and the communities that were working with us and support us. And KL in particular was very, very good because they support all the kids in care in the 9 nations. And the voices that came out and the stories that started being told by these young people. And seeing one young person that when I first had breakfast with her, when she first came into the university, was going to be part of the program, there's a few of them that came and she didn't say a word. She was very, very intimidated sitting at breakfast with the president. She, didn't know that she had anything that could possibly contribute to the conversation. But as we had conversations over that semester and the next semester, end of that next semester, I saw her in front of the legislature buildings protesting and actually going up to the mic and speaking. So you think about that. and you think about young people being given an opportunity to be able to raise their voice in a safe place where they're getting supports, and they know they've got the hands of the university president on their back as they stand up there saying, we've got you, we support you, we're going to make sure that your voice is heard. And so those stories started emerging, and the impact of those stories in how we reacted as a university, on how we changed what we did, was important. But then how those voices, when they got together and worked in all the different institutions that we got to come on board with us, and then all of a sudden we had a new policy in the province where every child has been in care, within the parameters that the government set, which we didn't agree with, but we thought they should have been a little more magnanimous. But those voices of those young people is what drove that change. And so for me, the importance of stories can't be underestimated. And that's the importance of now the stories that we're receiving from the philanthropic efforts of this new foundation in supporting the kinds of challenges that we know exist in these communities, and to be able to open up the doors for choice, open up the doors for opportunity, open up the doors for education, and to feed the hope and to feed the strength of the individuals, and those individuals owning the experiences and owning the direction, not feeling beholden to a foundation. This is their community. This is their community-owned foundation, and it's their communities that are supporting them. And so part of this opportunity that we have with a new philanthropic organization is not only to have the opportunity to share these stories when people are willing to share the stories, but also there's so many people that have come up to me who are not in an Indigenous community and have asked me, how can we get involved? What can we do? How do we get engaged in this? Because they really have no connection in. They don't really haven't developed any relationships and haven't had the privileges that I've had in that context. And it really harkens back to a lot of work that I was doing in the 80s and 90s and into 2000s when I was in Saskatchewan and also on the East Coast. Did a lot of work with the disappearing people in rural Saskatchewan, did a lot of people with the First Nations communities in Saskatchewan as it related to population health. But there was this whole notion of needing to be needed. And the volunteers, motivation for people to participate was needing to be needed. And one of the things that we've got a responsibility to in this philanthropic organization, as it relates to reconciliation, is continuing to help people understand in the communities that the foundation serves and the nation serve, is to share the stories and help people understand how they can be involved in the impacts that they can have by participating, and how they can indeed engage, and how they can learn, and how they can benefit of individuals. And this is the whole benefits approach that is a challenge, and it's part of this fundamental piece that Sharon's been talking about, which is the reciprocity, and how we ensure that that's just fundamental to everything that we're doing, based on what the nation's direction is and what the nations feel is the right way to go about this and the right way to do this. So it's a long story, but it's so interesting to watch and learn as we grow, and just so important that we continue to share where we can, and have individuals share where we can, and people understand the incredible inequity. Again, let's go back to that 0.5%, not 1%, 0.55, wasn't it? We'll go back to 0.55%. What's the population in Canada? It's over 5% probably. So how do we get at that? How do we get at that and help people understand? No, those figures aren't known. The need's not known. Many people think still, I'll get off right away, Sharon. The many people think that education for individuals in First Nation communities is paid for by the federal government. Well, that's not the truth. That's a false fact. And the reality is, since it has never been fully funded, but the reality is, when the tight situation back in the 90s, we had a pulling back of all the social service money by the federal government and then distributed in a different manner. The nations were capped at 2% growth in their education funds. And as a result of that number, most nations have less than a third of the money they need to fund all the kids that need to go to school. And it's a travesty. It's a public policy piece that should have been corrected 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and it hasn't been. And it needs to be. And so that's why philanthropic organizations need to fill in the gap, because kids can't go to school. You can't go to school. Education is the number one determinant. How do you possibly get involved and engaged and participate and develop economy for you and your family and your community if you don't have the education or access to the education that you've been promised? So again, reconciliation has a wonderful pathway in front of it, because there's so much opportunity. We just need to get more people and give more people the opportunity to engage and really participate and support these communities the way I know they can. We live in an incredibly rich country. You know, KL on the east coast of Vancouver Island in the south, from Qualicum down to Malahat, incredibly rich territory. Have we mobilized that yet? Not yet, but we're starting to. And that's going to be a very, very exciting part of this learning. And again, a part of what I know, our chair of the foundation board is excited about participating. All the other board members that I know excited about participating, and all the community members that we can engage. And thank you all for being on today and listening. I think there's huge opportunities to engage and establish partnerships. Because those partnerships, Sharon mentioned that, those partnerships are what's going to allow it to happen. Learning from each other, understanding how we can work together on these things, and understanding how we can invest in a manner that allows individuals to continue to grow and evolve and contribute to their communities, contribute to all of our communities. And it's that whole economic, social prosperity for all of us that we know we all want to do. Thanks, Sharon. Sorry to go on.
No, that's fabulous. Thank you. Thank you, Ralph. And we are coming close to the end, and I know some of you may have to log off, but we do have a question from Kaylee. Thanks, Kaylee, for your question. And Ralph, you spoke to it a lot, but specifically around, you know, that engagement piece and how people on the call can engage. And Kaylee speaking specifically from the business community on engaging youth. And so maybe again, I'll start with Louise. Do you have any insights for Kaylee?
So many things have been said that I think I'll already address the question, like giving charitably to the KL Foundation is going to assist the youth in ways that are directed by the community. But I also did want to mention that one of the initiatives that VIU did, which I thought was really powerful in recognizing systemic disconnect with post-secondary education, there was a wonderful program of, you know, mentorship and help to get people to university. But coming out the other end, students face systemic discrimination in finding jobs. And there was a link between the students coming out and the business community, so that internships were created and students could actually be brought into the companies to be able to do internships, which were paid and which allowed the student and the company to get to know each other. And one of the things I just want to close by saying is that the big success out of that story for me was how the family portraits of the companies all started to change when they brought in Indigenous students who then started to, be part of the relationships in the company. People learned from the Indigenous students about their communities and potlatching and their worldviews. And, the reciprocity started to flow most directly. And of course, to the Indigenous students who were provided the opportunity of a job in a company that were teaching them skills and giving them the opportunity. So I just wanted to close with that. And thank you for the question.
Great. Thank you, Louise. That's a great concrete example of a way that, to respond to Kaylee's question. Ralph, do you have anything to add to that? I know you shared a lot, but I don't want to, if you have some closing thoughts.
No, just to say, Kaylee, I think the internship program is alive and well for the BC Business Council. The Champions Table, which is made up of 12 business leaders, presidents of companies across British Columbia, and 12 of the First Nations chiefs, including the Grand Chief in British Columbia, and they get together regularly. And this internship program evolved out of the Champions Table, and it was about how do we work together, how do we grow. And as an educator and educational institution, we were involved in that. Louise knows it well. She was right in the thick of that, and it was so important to have people talking about the responsibility and how it's not just you give somebody a job and everything's going to be fine. It's about how do you take care of the challenges of inequity within a company and all of the unsaid things that happen when a person joins a new environment, and how do you support them, and how do you help them transition, and how do you ensure that they have the right equipment that they need to be able to do the work that they're doing. And there's so many things. And by being mindful about this and being focused on it, what's happened is the conversations have led to, again, new understandings about what some of the challenges might be. And through those understandings, then people can act. And so fundamentally to all of this is wherever you are and whatever communities you're in is you learn more, and then once you get the information you need is to act and stand up and take responsibility in your own place and where you are within the parameters that you are able to lever and address some of the challenges that exist, because we know they all do. And we know that there's a need. And if you have any more questions about that, don't hesitate to call Sharon. She's always available. And I know that if it's more specific that Louise or I could talk to it, we're both more than happy to talk to particular questions where we can add some value.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sharon.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, great. Again, thank you both for your, very insightful and heartfelt responses to the questions. And yeah, again, it's what your, participants you're hearing is this, again, this commitment to listen and learn and to act. And I think all of you obviously are demonstrating that today by being here and learning from some of the leaders in this work. And so I really want to thank you for your time. And as Ralph said, and Louise, we hope to keep this going and we feel, as Ralph said, this is part of our responsibility as a new community Indigenous-led foundation, is to create the space for learning and education with all of you. We're learning ourselves. I'm learning every day. And I feel like I'm just scratching the surface on what I need to learn. But that's what makes this work so great. And again, really want to have those conversations with each and every one of you so we can learn together. So thank you for your time. Again, we have one more session if you're interested on second Tuesday of November, and that will be with Mary Ellen and Brent Edwards, our remaining board members. And we invite you there, and please share. And again, send the evaluation. So any tips you have for what you'd like to see in the future for these types of conversations are ways that we can support you in your work. We're happy to listen and learn. And as Ralph said, I'm always available. So again, thank you for your time, everyone. And we'll wish you the best in this work and on with your day.